Hello, everyone, and welcome to Modern Ministries. I'm sorry for last week. I had at least presumed COVID and couldn't speak on camera, so we didn't end up pushing out a video last week. But hopefully, from now on, we'll be a little bit more consistent and I won't catch COVID again. We are still exploring the Sandy Foundation series and looking at different foundations that can get you into some hairy situations and can lead to some dangerous situations in your life. And we're still looking at Matthew 7:24 through 27, and that's really going to be our focal point for the series. In Matthew 7:24 through 27, it says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. The rain came down, the stream rose, the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, the wind blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash." With that being said, it's very important to recognize where building a foundation in people or a person can be very dangerous, but also visit the importance of having a community around you and having those people to consult. And today, although the teaching won't really have a lot of Bible verses in it, I will visit a couple at the end just that we could do a little bit more exploring and expand our learning. So when I think of this foundation of people, I think of dependency, I think of reliance. And when I think of that, I think of how an infant relies on his mother or his father figure to meet its basic needs. So needing to eat, needing to sleep, needing to be burped and changed and everything like that. I think of that. And when I think about that in the terms of an adult world, when we become dependent on a person or a thing, we find ourselves in a real troubling situation when we try to replace what God's supposed to be doing in our life with what a person is able to do in our life. And I know personally in my life, there's been plenty of times where I tried to replace or fill in a hole that God's supposed to be filling as my father or my counselor or my guide or whatever it is, with some person or something or some group of people. For example, in 2020, I was in this relationship with this woman. And I created a heavy dependence on her because I felt like she was the only thing that was really definite in my life. So my spirituality was wavering, my friendships were wavering, all because I wasn't really putting myself into this bigger thing and allowing the relationship to be its own structure. And God taught me even before that relationship that a lot of times my friends' opinions or what I thought the church would view me as or my school would view me as or my friends would view me as, I became heavily dependent on those things rather than the things that actually mattered of me being an individual and me creating my own life. And all this is not to say that your friend's advice or your father's advice or your mother's advice or whoever it is, that their advice doesn't matter, because that wise counsel doesn't matter in your life. You need the advising of people who have lived your situation or even people who are in your situation with you of how they deal with it or how they get through it. God will often use those people to speak his words into you and to speak his guidance into you. And honestly, I've gotten some of the best advice in my life from people who didn't even believe in the word. I will say, however, cross-checking those things and just making sure, validating that those are the things of God and not the things of the devil or your flesh is also important. Because a lot of the time we don't really recognize or see how big the devil can be influencing our decisions. And a lot of times we could be looking and saying, hey, I'm going to church. Hey, I'm involved in a small group. I have a community. But you have to also evaluate what you're doing outside of those things, because the devil's in church. The devil knows scripture better than you and I. The devil has his seat ready at church. He's ready to learn because he's going to learn every way that he can to deceive you and persuade you to pull you away from God. And relationships often go through hills and valleys. It's often what defines a relationship is how you bounce back from those things. But if you find yourself rooted in your relationship and your relationships going through seasons where it's wavering, you often find times where you feel like your life is also wavering in that same pattern. And being rooted in something that's larger than your relational life or larger than your friendships can help prevent that instability, help prevent you feeling like when things are low, your whole life is low. Or when your relationship is high, your life is at an all-time high. And I know for me personally, in my last relationship where I found myself heavily dependent, when that relationship ultimately ended, I felt like I couldn't even function. I felt like I was almost grieving a loss of a loved one because I was so dependent on this one person, and nobody else's opinion really held weight in my heart, to the point where when I lost her, I felt like I lost everything. The exact opposite can be very true, where you're at an all-time high, you're at a really good point in your relationship, or you're at a really good point in that friendship that really is rooted deep into your foundation, and you don't really see the issues that can be grown through, or you don't really see the issues that you really need to work on. Whether that's ignoring needs in the church, or that's ignoring your own personal needs or your friendships. For me, I was withdrawing from the church, and I started withdrawing from my small groups and my communities. I started being heavily dependent on one person's opinion, and my friends would give me advice, and I would almost completely ignore it because I felt like if it's against anything that I really am on a track to do right now, everything's going well right now, so I'm not going to follow it. This is partially why God is kind of a selfish God, because he wants us to only serve him and believe in him, because he doesn't want us to idolize these different things like money and power and relationships ultimately, because we become a servant to that and we lose sight of everything else that's going on. We lose sight of him, we lose sight of the church, we lose sight of what we're doing at our job. Now, I'm not telling you to kick all your friends to the curb and break up with your girlfriend or boyfriend and say, I'm in this by myself with God and that's it. I'm not saying that. Those people around you, those friends that you have, that relationship that you're working towards a marriage with, all those things are still important. And you should not lose sight of the fact that those things are very good things in your life. Although you should be weary of the fact that these friendships and relationships, if you root too heavily in them, can result in dangerous situations, you should also be very motivated to create those communities with those like-minded people who are going to push you, who are going to keep you accountable, who are going to celebrate you when you're up and mourn with you when you're down. And a lot of times, at least talking from a Christian perspective, everyone sees these things and they're like, man, I don't want to join some Bible study. I don't want to sit around in a group and hold hands and talk about how good God has been or how bad God's been or whatever it is. And that's really not what community looks like all the time. Although it very well can look like a Bible study, or very well can look like, hey, let's get together and worship together. A lot of times it just looks like, hey, let's all get coffee together and talk about what's going on. Hey, let's go play a sport together. I know for me, I have a group that is just going to go play sports together. I have a group that goes to a coffee shop and studies the Bible or studies a book or just deepens our understanding of ourselves. I have another group that's just young adults. So just think about those communities that you have that you don't really recognize around the city, around your state, or even on a small level around your friend group. Who do you go work out with? Just start to develop each other and start to work on each other, and you guys can progress together and keep each other accountable. These communities are so important because we're really not made in this world to be able to handle everything all by ourselves. We definitely go through battles on our own, but ultimately we really are supposed to carry other people's burdens and allow other people to carry our burdens. And a lot of times we find ourselves in these situations where we feel like, I got this, and you put on your bag and you go. And it's really a hard pill to swallow when you hear that you can't do it on your own. You can't train for that job on your own. You need someone to train you. You can't train for that position in your sport. Someone has to train you. Someone has to coach you. Everything that you do, you are trained to do. Everything that you do is learned from someone else. And why not create that situation where you go ahead and you be a blessing to another person? You go ahead and advise people and you coach people and you train people because you've already been through it. You've already done it. So now you can do the same for someone else. I know in my life plenty of times the devil has convinced me and persuaded me that, hey, you can handle it on your own. And I took that as almost God's voice, or I took that as my own voice, and I said, hey, I can take care of this. I got this. And that's exactly what the devil wants from you, because it's easier to attack someone when they're all by themselves and they're isolated and they're in their feelings. It's easy to do that. It's not so easy when that person has a community around them. That person has a friend that's constantly keeping them accountable and checking in on them. And like I said, these communities don't have to look like a certain thing. It could really be a huge group of people that you all go out and do a sport, or it could be 2 or 3 people that you guys sit down and you guys just better each other. You guys hold each other accountable. You guys celebrate when you guys are up and you guys mourn when you're down. And I'll leave you off with these 2 pieces of scripture. It'll be Ecclesiastes 4:12 and it'll be Proverbs 18:1. So in Ecclesiastes, it says, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. And in Proverbs 18, it says, a man who isolates himself seeks his own desire. He rages against all wise judgment. I think these kind of just outline the importance of finding a good community around you, and just sum up why, although we need to be weary about the community around us and how rooted we are in the people, it's also showing the importance of why we need that community. And that brings me to a close. I thank you all for tuning in and watching. Next Sunday, as long as I don't catch COVID again, of course, we'll be talking about the foundation and status and the dangers of that. I heavily appreciate all the support that I'm getting from everyone that reaches out. I encourage you all to explore and learn more about building communities and reliance and dependency. I once again thank you all for watching. Modern Christianity socials will be in the description, also attached to the video. There you will see updates that I hopefully will give you in the upcoming days. Subscribe for more, and remember, you are loved, you are chosen, you are here on purpose. Have a blessed day.